Nobody is thinking about you right now. Not the person you embarrassed yourself in front of last week. Not the colleague who witnessed you say the wrong thing in that meeting. Not the person who watched you stumble, or fail, or look uncertain, or say something you immediately wished you could take back. They have moved on. They are thinking about themselves, their own embarrassments, their own uncertainties, their own private loop of replaying moments they wish had gone differently. You are not in their thoughts. And here is the part that should devastate you, but won't, once you really sit with it. You never really were. The audience you've been performing for your entire life, it was never watching as closely as you thought. The judges you've been dressing for, speaking carefully for, managing your image for, they were always too busy managing their own. This isn't a sad truth. This is the most liberating thing anyone will ever tell you. And once you understand it fully, in the way that only philosophy can deliver it, you will stop building your life around an audience that doesn't exist, and start building it for the only person who was always actually there. There is a psychological phenomenon called the spotlight effect. Researchers discovered it by asking people to wear an embarrassing t-shirt into a room full of strangers, and then estimate how many of those strangers noticed and remembered the shirt. Participants consistently guessed around 50%. The actual number? Around 25%. We believe we are being observed, remembered, and judged at roughly twice the rate we actually are. We are the center of our own universe, and we assume, unconsciously, that we are the center of everyone else's. We are not. And this gap, between the imagined audience and the real one, is the source of an extraordinary amount of suffering, of decisions made to avoid judgment that wasn't coming, of words left unsaid to protect an image nobody was scrutinizing, of years spent performing a version of yourself for people who were far too preoccupied with performing their own version to notice yours. Think about what that means for your life right now. The risk you haven't taken because of what people might think. The dream you haven't started because of how it might look if you fail publicly. The relationship you haven't left, the job you haven't quit, the version of yourself you haven't stepped into, because the imagined audience in your head issued a verdict before you even tried. And that audience was never real, and here is the harder truth underneath that. The tragedy is not that people don't care about you. The tragedy is that you have been spending the energy meant for building your life on managing the perceptions of people who were never paying the attention you assumed. There was a philosopher who understood this mechanism, the tyranny of the imagined gaze, the prison of performing for others, with such precision and such ruthlessness that his words read less like ancient wisdom and more like a diagnosis, written specifically for you, in the year you are living, in the city you are sitting in right now. His name was Marcus Aurelius, and what he discovered about the opinion of others, and about where your attention actually belongs, will restructure how you move through the world. 161 AD, Rome. Marcus Aurelius has just become emperor. He did not want the position. He was a philosopher, a student of Stoic thought, a man whose deepest desire was to read, to think, to write, to live quietly and well. He was handed the most scrutinized, most publicly exposed role in the known world, and immediately, the performance began. Every decision analyzed, every word repeated and reinterpreted by people who had never met him, every policy debated in the Senate, in the streets, in the courts of foreign kings who had their own reasons to watch Rome carefully, every expression on his face read for weakness, every act of mercy, interpreted by some as virtue and by others as vulnerability. And here is what Marcus did. He went home. He closed his door. He sat alone with his journal, the private one, the one never intended for any audience. And he wrote to himself the thing he needed to remember most. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Not strength in managing perception, strength in abandoning the management of it entirely. He wrote again and again, in different forms, about the meaninglessness of reputation, about how quickly the most celebrated figures of history had been forgotten, about how the opinion of others, which had felt so consequential, so permanent, so defining, dissolved like smoke within a generation of the person's death. He wrote, "How many a Chrysippus, how many a Socrates, how many an Epictetus have time swallowed up?" He was reminding himself that even the greatest, even the philosophers whose work had shaped his own mind, were largely forgotten by the ordinary person on the street, were reduced to names, to fragments, to the briefest shadows in the vast ocean of history. If that was true of Socrates, whose ideas still echo 2,500 years later, what does it say about the opinion of your colleague, your neighbor, the stranger who watched you stumble? It says, it was never the point. And if it was never the point, what is? Marcus Aurelius built his entire philosophy of self-governance on a single foundational insight that most people hear and immediately agree with, and almost never actually live. The only domain over which you have real, total, unconditional sovereignty is your own mind, not your reputation, that lives in other people's heads, not your legacy, that will be shaped by forces you'll never control, not even your body, ultimately, which can be taken from you by illness, by accident, by time. Only the mind, only the quality of your attention, the direction of your will, the values you choose and re-choose every day through your behavior. This is the Stoic concept of prohairesis, the faculty of rational choice, the part of you that cannot be touched by anything outside it unless you allow it. The inner citadel that Epictetus, who had lost everything a human being can lose, declared was the only thing worth defending. But here is where this philosophy becomes genuinely dangerous to the life you've been living. If the only domain that matters is the interior one, then every hour spent managing external perception is an hour stolen from the only work that actually counts. Every moment spent worrying about what someone thinks of you is a moment you did not spend thinking about who you want to become. Every energy unit poured into maintaining an image is an energy unit taken from building the reality that image was supposed to represent. Marcus wrote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one. Not perform being one, not convince people you are one. Be one." The performance and the reality are not the same thing, and the tragedy of a life spent performing is that it produces neither genuine external respect, which almost always recognizes authenticity faster than image management, nor the internal satisfaction of a life actually lived. Seneca understood the same thing from a different angle. He wrote, in a letter to his friend Lucilius, with the warmth and urgency of someone who had almost run out of time, "It is not that we have so little time, but that we lose so much. The life we receive is not short, but we make it so. We make it short by spending it on the wrong things, on rehearsing, on performing, on managing, on maintaining, on the imaginary audience that is not watching." And here is the third pillar, from Epictetus, who had the most radical perspective of all three. Seek not the good in external things. Seek it in yourself. He was not recommending isolation. He was not prescribing indifference to the world. He was making a precise claim about the source of what matters, about where the life worth building is actually located. Inside. Only inside. Always inside. Not in how many people admire you, not in how large your audience grows, not in what the room thinks when you walk in the quality of the person walking in what they know, what they've built, what they've decided, privately, without applause, to be. So what does this actually look like in the specific, ordinary, messy reality of your life? Lesson 1. Stop auditing yourself through imaginary eyes. Right now, without choosing to, you are monitoring yourself through a mental simulation of how others see you. It runs constantly, narrating your choices before you make them, reviewing your words after you say them, running a continuous cost-benefit analysis on every action based on what the imagined audience would think. This simulation is almost always wrong. As the spotlight effect confirms, the audience is smaller, less attentive, and far less interested than the simulation reports. The practice Marcus used was direct and unglamorous. Whenever he caught himself making a decision based on how it would appear, rather than whether it was right, he would stop, name it, and ask the replacing question. If no one would ever know, would I still do this? That question cuts through almost all performance instantly, because the honest answer reveals whether the action is aligned with your actual values, or whether it is purely a management of perception. Start asking it, daily. It will surprise you how often the answer is the second thing. Lesson 2. Invest in the person in the room when no one is watching. Here is where becoming genuinely formidable actually happens. Not in the performance, in the practice, in the hour before dawn when no one is observing, in the work done without documentation, in the discipline maintained without an audience to validate it, in the choice made correctly, not because someone was watching, but because the kind of person you are becoming makes it. Epictetus was explicit about this. The work of becoming is private. The results may eventually be visible, but the work itself happens in the hidden spaces, in the choice, the habit, the repeated small decision that no one sees and that no one will credit you for. This is precisely why it matters, because the person built in private has something the performer does not. They know it is real. They have the evidence, accumulated over hundreds of private moments, that who they are is not contingent on whether anyone is watching. And that certainty produces something unshakable. Build in private. Build consistently. Trust the compounding. Lesson 3. Let people underestimate you, and use it. Marcus Aurelius was frequently underestimated early in his reign. His philosophical nature, his preference for reading over battles, for reflection over spectacle, was misread by many of his advisors and enemies as weakness. He used it, not strategically, not manipulatively, but in the specific sense that he did not spend energy correcting the misperception. He spent that energy on the work, on actually becoming what the performance of power was supposed to represent. The person who feels compelled to correct every misperception, who cannot tolerate being underestimated, who must always ensure their full value is being recognized, is a person controlled by the opinion of others, is a person expending on reputation management the energy that could be going toward making the reputation accurate. Let people underestimate you. Let the misconception exist. Channel the energy that would have gone to correcting it into the work that will make the correction unnecessary. Lesson 4. Use solitude as a competitive advantage. In a world of chronic connectivity, where every thought is potentially shareable, every achievement potentially documentable, every moment of progress potentially an opportunity for validation, the person who chooses solitude is quietly doing something no one else is doing. They are thinking, deeply, without interruption, without the distorting influence of real-time feedback on their developing ideas, without the subtle pressure to perform having figured it out before they actually have. Marcus Aurelius made solitude non-negotiable, not as withdrawal from the world. He governed the most complex empire in history, but as the necessary condition for the kind of thinking that governing required. His journals were not shared. His reflections were not broadcast. His uncertainty was not performed for an audience. The result was a quality of thought, of genuine, original, pressure-tested thinking that almost no one around him could match. Protect your solitude, not from the world, but for yourself. Schedule time with your own mind, not to produce content, not to plan how to appear, but to actually think, to know what you believe, without first running it past what others might think. Lesson 5. Move toward your life, not away from the audience's judgment. This is the one that changes everything structurally. Most people organize their life in one of two ways. They move toward things they genuinely want, or they move away from things they fear, including, very often, the judgment of others. The person moving away from judgment makes decisions that are primarily defensive, choosing the safe option not because it's right for them but because it's hardest to criticize, staying in situations that have stopped working because leaving would require a public explanation, dimming their own ambitions because ambition, if visible and then unsuccessful, is embarrassing. This produces a life shaped not by genuine desire, not by the actual person who lives it, but by the architecture of anticipated disapproval. Marcus Aurelius returned to this again and again in his journals, the distinction between action motivated by the internal compass and action motivated by the external gaze. The first produces a life, the second produces a performance of one. The practice is this: for every major decision, ask, am I moving towards something I genuinely want, or am I moving away from something I fear being judged for? Then choose the direction that has nothing to do with the audience. Lesson 6. Do the work so thoroughly that the opinion becomes irrelevant. Here is the oldest truth in the philosophy of self-mastery: genuine competence, genuine character, genuine depth, built carefully over time through consistent private work, eventually produces an outcome that makes the management of opinion unnecessary. Not because everyone comes to agree with your worth, but because you do. Because the accumulated evidence of who you are, stored internally, built privately, known only to you in its fullness, becomes the foundation you stand on. And when you are standing on that foundation, the opinion of people who have not done that work, who have not made those choices, who have not built what you have built, stops feeling like a verdict. It starts feeling like weather, real, present, occasionally uncomfortable, but not the point, not the measure, not the thing that determines whether you are worth something. You build that foundation not by talking about it, not by performing it, by doing the work, day after day, in the hours when no one is watching, toward the person you have decided, privately, finally, irreversibly, to become. Here is what shifts when this philosophy actually takes hold. The energy you were spending on managing perception, enormous, constant, largely invisible to you until it's gone, returns, floods back into the actual work, into the actual relationships, into the actual life you were performing rather than living. The decisions you make become cleaner because they are no longer distorted by the imagined audience. They are made by you, for you, based on what you actually want to build and who you actually want to become. And clean decisions, made from genuine internal alignment, compound in a way that image-managed decisions never can. The relationships that remain after this shift are the ones that were real, because the ones built on the performance of you, on the version you constructed for external consumption, cannot survive contact with the actual you. And that is not a loss, that is a filter. And perhaps most unexpectedly, the people around you begin to respond differently. Not because you've become more impressive, but because something has changed in the quality of your presence. Because a person who has genuinely stopped performing is extraordinarily rare and extraordinarily magnetic. There is nothing more compelling than someone who is completely at home in themselves, who does not need the room's approval to feel certain of their own worth, who is exactly the same whether being observed or not. That person is not playing a role. They are simply, finally, completely, themselves. And the world, which is full of people still trapped in performance, is drawn to that, the way plants move toward light. Marcus Aurelius spent 20 years as the most watched human being on earth, and in his private journals, the ones he never intended anyone to read, the ones that contained his doubts and failures and daily recommitments to the person he was trying to be, he barely mentioned it. He wrote about virtue, about time, about the people he loved and would lose, about the work of becoming someone he could respect when no one was watching. He was not performing for the empire. He was building himself for himself. And here is the lesson that took him decades of public life to arrive at, the one that is available to you right now. before the decades pass. Nobody is watching as closely as you think. Nobody is judging as harshly as you fear. Nobody is keeping the score you've been keeping. The audience was always smaller than you imagined. The stakes were always lower than you feared. And the only performance that has ever mattered, the only one that will outlast the noise and the approval and the opinion, is the one you put on every day in private. For no one. For yourself. In the direction of the person you have decided, finally, to become. Nobody cares about you. So stop living for them and start living for you. That is where everything real begins. If this video said something that landed, if one idea is still moving through you, I want you to do one thing differently today. One decision, just one, made with no thought of how it will appear, made purely on the basis of what is right for you, what aligns with your values, what the person you're becoming would choose. That's the practice. That's where it starts. Subscribe to this channel, because every week, this is what we do. We take the deepest wisdom ever written and make it usable in your real life. Hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and share this with someone who is still building their life for an audience that isn't paying attention. Because the next video is going to challenge something else you've been carrying that was never yours to carry. Don't miss it.